Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. The flying snake was roughly 3,000 meters long and 30 meters thick. It almost looked like a flood dragon as opposed to a serpent, especially considering that it had 2 long, curved horns, and 3 clawed talons. Its scales reflected dazzling sunlight, and if one examined it closely, they would detect a holy air to it. The Beast King aura which roiled out from it made it seem like the monarch of all beasts, and caused all of the river-defying sect's battle beasts to tremble. The pressure weighing down on their blood made it such that none of them dared to even think about fighting back against the huge snake. The only exception was the Heavenhorn Ink Dragon, whose scales stood on end as it howled in defiance. Heaven and earth went dim, and a huge wind kicked up. Down below, the cultivators of the river-defying sect were completely astonished, and began to cry out in surprise. That's another Beast King. In the cultivation world of the lower reaches, Beast Kings were rare, and few people even had a chance to see a single one in their entire lives. Bruiser's birth had been unexpected and quite coincidental. In the middle reaches, Beast Kings were also rare. However, considering how vast of a territory the middle reaches covered, they were not impossible to find. In fact, quite a few roamed the depths of the mountains and jungles. In the moment that the flying snake Beast King appeared, Li Zimo's face flickered, and he rose to his feet, brilliant light shining in his eyes. His nascent soul aura erupted out, and he flicked his sleeve, sending a powerful gale force wind shooting toward the flying snake. Behind him, Bruiser threw his head back and howled, causing his own Beast King aura to surge, almost as if he wished to outshine the flying snake. However, it was obvious that whether it was in terms of aura or cultivation base, the flying snake far surpassed Bruiser. Bruiser was like a baby, and the flying snake was like an adult. Behind Li Zimo and Bruiser, there was another aura that rumbled out, which transformed into a beam of blood-colored chi that shot up into the clouds. It was Bai Xiaochun. That pillar was formed from the power of Bai Xiaochun's chi and blood, and because of his Heaven Dao Gold Core cultivation base, it was even tinged with golden light. How dare you? Bai Xiaochun shouted, his eyes crimson. Flying up into the air, he performed an incantation gesture with his right hand, sending a black light flying out of his bag of holding. It was none other than the renegade dragonhorn, which shot toward the flying snake, fueled by the full power of Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base. At the same time, he opened his third eye, causing violet light to spill out onto the creature. Rumbling sounds filled heaven and earth as Li Zimo's tempest bore down on the flying snake. A moment later, Bai Xiaochun's renegade dragonhorn also closed in, bursting with a Heaven Dao aura. The flying snake's eyes widened, and it quickly coiled up, apparently relying only on its fleshly body power to defend itself. Incredible rumbling echoed out as the tempest collapsed, and the renegade dragonhorn was sent spinning off to the side. At the same time, the flying snake was shoved backward by a full 300 meters. Bruiser let out another roar of rage, turning to glare at the flying snake with a look of utter ferocity. However, he also had his misgivings. He was currently at a critical juncture as his violet core continued to form. The flying snake was a big threat, and made Bruiser very, very uneasy. In that moment, a tiny figure suddenly appeared next to him, reached out, and placed a hand on his side. Bruiser was currently 300 meters tall, so that figure was minuscule in comparison. However, the hand which reached out to him seemed powerful enough to shake mountains, and as soon as it touched him, all of his anxiety and nervousness vanished. That figure was none other than Bai Xiaochun. Focus on your core formation, he said. I'll take care of everything else. As he spoke, his gaze fell upon the greedy flying snake some distance away. Moments later, Li Zimo appeared next to Bai Xiaochun, and the core formation Dharma protectors flew up into the air as well. At the same time, the profound stream division spell formation erupted with power, materializing 9 great swords which immediately locked onto the flying snake. The flying snake's cold eyes widened. It was a Beast King, and in the nascent soul level at that. However, this was the river-defying sect, one of the 4 great sects of the Middle Reaches, and the flying snake wouldn't intentionally provoke them unless it was absolutely necessary. Bruiser's core formation had been so enticing that it simply followed its feelings and tried to grab the violet core. With Bruiser's Beast King core, a breakthrough from nascent soul into the Diva realm would have been much more possible. The cultivators of the river-defying sect were equally leery of the snake. Even Li Zimo didn't wish to tangle with a fully developed Beast King unless absolutely necessary. Beast Kings were capable of summoning countless lesser beasts to fight for them, and if that happened, it would put the river-defying sect in a very unfavorable situation. The two sides were in somewhat of a deadlock as they stared at each other. However, that was when even more streams of nascent soul divine sense flew out and locked onto the flying snake. Although the river-defying sect didn't want to tangle with a beast king, if it truly attempted to attack the sect, then they wouldn't hold back in the fighting. They would kill the beast no matter the cost. Li Zimo's eyes narrowed, and he began to speak in a voice as cold as ice. Considering you've practiced cultivation all the way to your current level, Your Excellency, it's only appropriate to address you as a fellow Taoist. Today, the river-defying sect's champion battle beast is stepping into core formation. In order to prevent any misunderstandings, fellow Taoist, would you kindly take your leave? The snake's eyes glittered defiantly, and it looked over at Bruiser. By that time, the violet core above Bruiser was shining with dazzling light. The strange aroma continued to billow out in all directions as the violet core formed. In that moment, Bruiser's eyes shone with intense excitement as he watched the violet core shoot toward his open mouth. Just when he was about to swallow it up, the air next to him distorted and a hand reached out to grab the violet core. Everyone was shocked by this sudden development. As for Bai Xiaochun, his eyes were completely bloodshot, and a cry of rage escaped his lips as he unhesitatingly unleashed a fist strike onto the outstretched hand. At the same time, 3 cold snorts echoed out from Mount River Defiance, and Master Godwind, Frigid Sect, and Patriarch Crimson Soul instantly teleported out. Surprisingly, none of them showed any signs of having recently been in secluded meditation. Apparently, they had actually been watching over the proceedings the entire time. As soon as they appeared, they surrounded the hand and unleashed powerful divine abilities. Master Godwind spoke, his voice hoarse and echoing with killing intent. You've been surveilling the river-defying sect for some time now, haven't you, Your Excellency? Did you really think we wouldn't be able to deal with you? The attacks of the 3 patriarchs caused deafening roars to fill the air. The hand shattered to pieces, and the violet core continued downward toward Bruiser. However, at the same time, laughter rang out in the clouds as 3 beams of light suddenly shot down. Within those beams of light were indistinct figures, all of whom were moving with lightning speed toward the violet core. I originally thought some unique treasure had appeared. I can't believe it's actually the violet core of a beast king. Bizarre laughter echoed out from within all of the beams of light. However, it was in that moment that the spell formation rumbled, and a huge greatsword appeared that slashed toward the incoming beams of light. Next, even more patriarchs of the river-defying sect appeared. Everyone had assumed that they were in secluded meditation, and yet, just like Master Godwind and the others who had just appeared, that was clearly not the case. The flying snake's eyes glittered as it once again shot toward Bruiser. As of this moment, Bai Xiaochun understood what was happening. Over the last months, everything in the sect had seemed peaceful, but the truth was that numerous hidden entities had been infiltrating and spying on them. Bruiser's attempt at core formation was a unique situation that was drawing all of them out of hiding. The patriarchs hadn't been in secluded meditation at all, and had actually hoped for this to happen. The patriarchs were willing to take advantage of Bruiser for their goals, but to Bai Xiaochun, he was too important. Even if the sect was completely prepared for what would happen, he was too anxious to take any risks. Eyes bloodshot, he let out a roar of rage as he shot toward the Blood Ancestor. Chaotic fighting was unfolding. After the river-defying sect's nascent soul cultivators appeared, even more shadowy figures emerged to join the struggle. All of those figures had been concealing their auras to prevent the river-defying sect from identifying them. Furthermore, it wasn't just a single group of people, there were 4 groups. Even as the fighting broke out, the Blood Ancestor's eyes opened, revealing the maddened gaze of Bai Xiaochun. Bruiser was his son, and as a father, it enraged him to see people bullying him. He simply couldn't stand it that people were trying to steal Bruiser's violet core. Screw the hell off, he roared through the mouth of the Blood Ancestor. Rumbling sounds echoed to the highest heavens as the Blood Ancestor's right hand clenched into a fist and unleashed a fist strike. That fist strike was powered by the entirety of Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base. His Heaven Dao Gold core joined with his undying Heavenly King core to unleash explosive power. The enormous fist of the Blood Ancestor was like an entire continent rumbling through the air, causing the sky to shatter and sending an enormous shockwave blasting out. The faces of the infiltrators fell, and they scrambled to get out of the way. Those who were too slow immediately began to cough up blood. As for the flying snake, the fist hit it directly, and it screamed as it flew backward. Suddenly, everything went quiet. Everyone was looking at the enormous Blood Ancestor, shock written across their faces as they tried to determine if it even had any weaknesses. Master Godwind and Frigid Sect exchanged a glance. Originally, they had intended to let the fighting go on a bit longer in the hopes of luring out more infiltrators. However, now that Bai Xiaochun had taken control of the Blood Ancestor, they knew that delaying things could further enrage him. After a moment, they nodded to each other. "Time to end things," Frigid Sect murmured. "Even those who haven't showed their faces will be too frightened to make a move after what they've seen already." He waved his hand, and a black sun appeared up in the sky, to be joined moments later by a white sun. The two suns overlapped, as did the two ravens inside the sun. The newly formed raven then opened its eyes and emitted a deafening cry. Then, the raven flew out. At the same time, cackling laughter could be heard as a scarecrow stepped out of thin air. The Heavenhorn sword also appeared, flying toward Frigid Sect in a beam of golden light. Things weren't over yet. Although the spell formations which had been set up looked like they were tapped out, they suddenly glittered with brilliant light, and began to shine 3 times as brightly as before. 3 enormous glowing swords appeared, which began to destroy everything in their path. Heaven and earth shook violently as all of the intruders fled for their lives. Unfortunately, few could get very far. The Heavenhorn sword slashed one of them in half, and the cackling scarecrow appeared in front of another and began to skin him alive. Moments later, the victim was revealed to be a projection, but the sight of the attacking scarecrow was still bone-chilling. The light from the black and white suns made it impossible for any of the infiltrators to hide, and the black and white raven proceeded to slaughter them. However, none of that was very impressive when compared to the 3 glowing swords created by the spell formations. They quickly broke down into 3 nets, each one made up of 100,000 swords, which proceeded to slash their enemies to pieces. The flying snake appeared to be on the verge of escaping, but Li Zimo snorted coldly and chased after it. From a distance, the river-defying sect made for a spectacular sight. It was almost like flowers of swords were blooming above it. Strangely, many of the people who died didn't shed blood, and as their corpses fell to the ground, they simply vanished. Only a small group of actual bodies remained. Clearly, those who didn't leave corpses behind weren't there as their true selves, but had come in clone form. To them, the loss of a clone like that would be somewhat of a waste, but wouldn't truly injure them. As the clones vanished and the flower of swords began to fade, the violet core safely entered Bruiser's mouth. He swallowed it, and almost instantly, his aura began to rise. Inside the Blood Ancestor, Bai Xiaochun's face was ashen, and he looked completely exhausted. Even with his double cores, it was a draining thing to take control of the Blood Ancestor. As he looked over at the patriarchs, the animosity in his gaze was apparent. The patriarchs exchanged awkward glances. The truth was that Bruiser's core formation hadn't been part of their long-term plan. They had originally intended to use other methods to draw out the infiltrators. Even still, they were worried that Bai Xiaochun would take things the wrong way, so Frigid Sect appeared to offer a complete explanation. In the end, Bai Xiaochun snorted coldly and made a lot of demands on Bruiser's behalf before agreeing to let the matter drop. "Those old fogies," he grumbled to himself. "They're all wily old foxes." Then when he saw how Bruiser's energy was continuing to rise higher and higher, he got wrapped up in excitement and decided to forgive them for the time being. Beast Kings needed to rest and recuperate after reaching core formation, and the patriarchs themselves offered to stand as Dharma protectors for Bruiser during that time. Bai Xiaochun joined them, sitting there cross-legged as he waited for Bruiser to recover completely. However, waiting around was very boring. Soon he started to think about the baby girl that was the true spirit, and the river-defying pill. As the time passed, he became wrapped up in pondering the issue of how to concoct the pill. "I'm not going to be able to concoct the pill inside of me. That would only work if I had plenty of life force, which I don't. Although concocting it outside of the body is possible, it would be too difficult." He frowned in consternation. "Having a drop of blood from the true spirit should make it a bit easier, but I still don't think I have enough skill in the Tao of medicine to succeed." Bai Xiaochun felt quite dejected. It was a depressing thing to know what to do, but be unable to do it. The simplest thing would be to concoct it within myself. But I lack life force. Life force? Hey, wait a second. Suddenly, his eyes sparkled, and he looked down at his bag of holding. The little turtle is the relic of eternal indestructibility. His life force should be sufficient, shouldn't it? As Bai Xiaochun considered all these matters, his excitement grew. However, he didn't dare to give voice to his ideas, lest the little turtle catch on. The little turtle is too treacherous. I have to think of a way to get him to willingly give me some life force. He couldn't help but feel a bit of a headache whenever he reminisced about the good old days when the little turtle had been unconscious. Suddenly, his heart thumped. Unconscious. A crafty gleam appeared in his eyes as he suddenly realized that the best thing to do would be to concoct some sort of powerful knockout medicine. Early in the morning 7 days later, Bruiser suddenly opened his eyes and let out a long cry. As he did, violet light exploded out around him, and the fluctuations of core formation roiled out. At the same time, all of the other battle beasts in the river-defying sect began to howl. Having accomplished their task of standing as Dharma protectors, the patriarchs left with smiles on their faces. Bruiser was in high spirits. Although he spent the next few days with Bai Xiaochun, he eventually got bored and ran out to have fun. This time, though, he didn't leave the river-defying sect. Instead, he spent his time with the other battle beasts, as well as the female disciples he liked. Bai Xiaochun let him do as he wished. At the moment, he was almost completely focused on concocting his knockout medicine. Therefore, he remained in his immortals cave, mentally reviewing the countless medicine formulas which existed in his mind. Time passed. 2 months flew by. Bai Xiaochun had come up with a plan, and was making constant improvements to the new medicine formula. On a few occasions, the little turtle popped his head out of the bag of holding to look at Bai Xiaochun. He wasn't a mind reader, so he had no way to determine what exactly Bai Xiaochun was thinking. However, the crazed look in his eye left the little turtle with a bad feeling. Of course, Bai Xiaochun didn't give up on cultivation. In addition to mentally pondering the medicine formula, he continued to work with the undying tendons and the frigid school will evolving incantation. One morning at dawn, he finally finished his mental work with the medicine formula. At the same time, he suddenly realized that a jade slip in his bag of holding was vibrating. Upon producing it, he heard Frigid Sect's voice speaking in his mind. Xiaochun, come to the Grand Hall on Mount River Defiance. The other 3 great sects of the Middle Reaches have come for a visit. Bai Xiaochun was a bit taken aback. In recent discussions with the patriarchs, he'd been told that according to the speculations, some of the people who had infiltrated the sect had been rogue cultivators, but others had come from the 3 sects. After all, the river-defying sect was a newcomer, and the other 3 sects were definitely certain to feel them out. Considering how things had played out, Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but snort coldly as he rose to his feet. After donning his junior patriarch robes, he put an icy expression on his face and headed toward the Grand Hall. Along the way, he saw other cultivators of the river-defying sect looking in the direction of the Grand Hall, grim expressions on their faces. Eyes flickering, Bai Xiaochun hurried along until he caught sight of 3 groups of cultivators, all of whom wore expressions of disdain as they tried to shove away the river-defying sect disciples guarding the entrance of the Grand Hall. Each group had roughly a dozen people in it, including core formation and foundation establishment cultivators, and they all wore different Taoist robes. The first group had black robes decorated with images of blood moons, and radiated particularly murderous auras. They had sneers on their faces, and icy gazes filled with killing intent. Another group wore garments decorated with a starry sky. They were all exceedingly attractive, and the disdain in their sparkling eyes couldn't have been clearer. The final group dressed in Taoist robes that were black and white. That group contained both male and female cultivators, and radiated a feeling that made them seem as if they had transcended the mortal world. Despite that lofty air, they also looked completely disdainful. Bai Xiaochun had read introductions regarding the other 3 sects, and could immediately tell where they were from. The group wearing the starry sky designs were from the Starry River Court. The people with murderous auras were from the devilish Polarity River Court. As for those in the black and white Taoist robes, they were from the most powerful of the sects, the Tao River Court. The disciples of these 3 sects were standing directly in front of the Grand Hall, preventing anyone from entering. They were the guests, but they were acting like the hosts. They were even driving away the river-defying sect disciples who had been assigned to guard duty. Directly up above in the sky, an enormous, pitch-black lizard could be seen, and when it deigned to look down, its gaze was as cold as ice. It even seemed like it wished to eat the river-defying sect disciples. Some distance away from the lizard was an enormous battleship, fully 3,000 meters long, and completely silver in color. It reflected the sunlight in dazzling fashion, and pulsed with terrifying power. In another direction was a gigantic meteor, fully 3,000 meters across and surrounded by a scorching sea of flames. The heat radiating from the meteor was such that many plants and trees down below began to wither up. Even as Bai Xiaochun approached, a middle-aged cultivator from the Starry River Court shoved one of the Foundation establishment disciples of the river-defying sect, causing him to stagger backward 30 meters. "Back off," said the Starry River Court cultivator. "Nobody is allowed in here." Sneering, he turned and started chatting with his fellow sect disciples. "This really is a puny sect. I can't believe they have trash like this guarding the Grand Hall. His comrades sneered, and the disciples of the other two sects looked even more disdainful than before. The river-defying sect disciples were furious, but managed to hold their tempers. They well knew that the river-defying sect had only just entered the middle reaches, and didn't have a very stable position. Considering that the other three sects had only just arrived for their formal visit, and the patriarchs were all in the Grand Hall having a meeting, any conflicts which broke out could have very negative ramifications. On the other hand, it was obvious that the disciples from the other sects were trying to provoke a conflict. However, when they realized that the river-defying sect disciples weren't taking the bait, their faces turned even more grim. Despite that, none of them made any openly aggressive moves. As the disciples of the three sects exchanged hesitant glances, the leaders among each group began to talk loudly. I heard there are a lot of self-proclaimed chosen in the river-defying sect. Where's Bai Xiaochun? How about Song Ke, Ghost Fong, Nine Isles, Shangguan Tianyu, and Chen Manyao? Where are they? The nascent soul Taoist masters are having a meeting in the Grand Hall, and we juniors are stuck out here, bored out of our minds. Why don't the river-defying sect chosen come out to show their stuff? The other disciples in the three groups knew what their leaders wanted them to do. A young man stepped out of the crowd from the Polarity River Court, and each step he took caused cracking sounds to fill the air. Clearly, he had incredible fleshly body power. Looking around, he laughed loudly and then said, "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Di Gong, and I'm in late Foundation establishment. Fellow Taoists from the river-defying sect, please step forward and give me some cultivation tips." He wasn't the only one to walk out into the open. Cultivators emerged from the other two sects as well, to make similar taunts. "Seriously?" one of them said. "Nobody from the majestic river-defying sect will dare to swap pointers with me? What kind of a sect is this?" The river-defying sect disciples were panting in anger. A moment later, one of the late Foundation establishment disciples from the Profound Stream Division charged toward Di Gong. Two more disciples began to charge toward the cultivators from the other two sects. "Get your ass back in line," Di Gong said, laughing. Planting his right foot down onto the ground, he kicked off, spinning his leg through the air. Unexpectedly, though, this wasn't a kick powered by his fleshly body. A vast quantity of wind blades appeared, which shot forward in a dangerous magical attack. The Profound Stream Division disciple unleashed a flying sword, but to his surprise, the sword passed directly through Di Gong. By the time he realized that what he was looking at was an afterimage, it was too late, and Di Gong was right in front of him. Before he could react, Di Gong unleashed a fist strike which smashed right into him. Di Gong wasn't done yet, though. Laughing with vicious killing intent, he prepared to unleash another attack on the same disciple. The surrounding disciples of the river-defying sect were enraged, and a few of them flew over to try to save their fellow disciple. Meanwhile, the other two disciples who had flown out to challenge the visiting sects were being beaten back. Furthermore, their opponents seemed to be in the same killing mood as Di Gong. When Bai Xiaochun saw these events playing out, rage flickered in his eyes. In a flash, he appeared in front of the Profound Stream Division disciple, where he stood in place. When Di Gong's fist slammed into him, it didn't even move a hair on his head. The force of Di Gong's blow was redirected back at him, causing blood to spray out of his mouth as he tumbled backward, a look of shock on his face. "A core formation cultivator?" Di Gong bellowed. "How shameless, river-defying sect. You dare to have a core formation cultivator fight the Foundation establishment stage?" Even as his words were echoing out, Bai Xiaochun blurred into motion again, becoming a series of afterimages as he sped forward to rescue the other two disciples. He did the same thing, using his body to block the attacks being sent against them. He wasn't hurt at all, whereas the attackers from the other two sects were sent tumbling backward, coughing up blood and shouting out in rage. Completely shameless. How dare a core formation cultivator ambush a Foundation establishment disciple? Di Gong and the other two disciples were completely enraged as they stared at Bai Xiaochun with cold gazes. Bai Xiaochun blurred into motion again, ending up in front of the cultivators of the three sects, hands clasped behind his back and chin stuck up. Glaring at them, he said, "So what if I attacked some Foundation establishment cultivators? I've attacked Qi condensation disciples in the past too. Is that shameless? Besides, did you actually see me do any attacking? You were obviously hitting me. Seems to me like you're the shameless ones. 3 Foundation establishment cultivators actually had the gall to gang up on me, a core formation expert. You people are going way overboard, you bullies. Don't push me too far. When I get mad, I frighten even myself." The cultivators of the 3 sects stared back at him angrily, thinking back to try to remember if he really had made an attack or not. Meanwhile, the disciples of the river-defying sect were more excited than ever, and began to call out greetings. Junior Patriarch, greetings, Junior Patriarch, greetings, Junior Patriarch. The leaders of the groups from the other sects instantly realized who was standing in front of them, and their pupils constricted. At this point, a young man strode out from the starry river court, his eyes flickering with cold light. Hidden in his hand was a black spike. In his estimation, if he could cripple Bai Xiaochun here, there might be some negative consequences, but overall, it would be a big win. How amusing, he said. So, you're Bai Xiaochun, huh? Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Chen Yunshan. Why don't we swap pointers about? Even as he began to speak, core formation cultivators stepped out from among the disciples from the Polarity River Court and the Dao River Court, their eyes shining with cold light. However, before Chen Yunshan could finish speaking, Bai Xiaochun yelled, "You're forcing me to do this." With that, he threw a medicinal pill toward Chen Yunshan. Huh? Chen Yunshan said, jaw dropping. He waved his sleeve, but it didn't prevent the medicinal pill from exploding, causing black smoke to swirl out. His fellow disciples were also shocked, and waved their sleeves to disperse the smoke. However, there was some strange property to the smoke that made it impossible to dispel, and it even began to seep into them through their skin. Of course, as soon as the medicinal pill appeared, strange expressions appeared on the faces of the surrounding disciples of the river-defying sect. That was especially true of the disciples from the spirit and bloodstream divisions. They immediately began to back up, dragging the disciples of the other two divisions with them. Within moments, they were more than 300 meters away. The cultivators of the Dao River Court and Polarity River Court were shocked, and couldn't figure out why Bai Xiaochun had just thrown out a medicinal pill. Furthermore, the reactions of the river-defying sect were very telling, and they subconsciously began to back up as well. What are you doing, Bai Xiaochun? Chen Yunshan yelled angrily. Just when he was about to take a step forward, his eyes suddenly twitched. Simultaneously, one of his comrades behind him suddenly howled, lunged forward, and hugged him from behind. Junior Sister Li, he cried, I've finally found you. Within the blink of an eye, the dozen or so cultivators from the Starry River Court began to go crazy. One of the affected cultivators spread his arms wide and began to run back and forth. Another of them began to rave madly. Another suddenly began to smile broadly. Only the core formation disciple was able to stave off the effects with great effort. I'm flying. Fly, fly away. What is this place? Everybody get back. Ha ha ha. I've finally reached the Diva realm. From now on, I'm unparalleled under heaven. Some of the affected disciples wore looks of terror on their faces, and began to scream at the tops of their lungs. There was one who suddenly seemed drunk with pleasure, and immediately flew up into the sky toward the huge lizard. Hey baby, he said. Don't be scared, I'm coming. Hissed expressions of shock and surprise could be heard outside the grand hall. As for the disciples of the river-defying sect, they were looking at Bai Xiaochun as if he were some sort of god. That was especially true of the disciples from the bloodstream division, many of whom literally shed tears as they thought back to situations they had encountered in the past. The disciples from the spirit stream division felt similarly sympathetic. As for the profound stream division, many of them had faced Bai Xiaochun and his team on the battlefield, and had been similarly tormented. Then there was the pill stream division disciples, whose eyes shone with bright light. They had heard many stories of Bai Xiaochun's pill concocting, which by this point were virtually legends. To see such things occurring with their own eyes filled their hearts with passion. Off to the side, the disciples of the Polarity River Court and the Dao River Court looked profoundly alarmed. Not only were they crying out in shock, they were rushing backward at top speed, doing anything they could to avoid contact with the black strands of smoke. What's going on? Heavens! What kind of pill is that? It's absolutely terrifying. I can't believe a medicinal pill like that exists in the world. Look, even the core formation cultivator can't hold out any longer. That medicinal pill is horrifying. The disciples of the two sects looked over at Bai Xiaochun with expressions of unprecedented fear, especially the female disciples. The more they thought about the ramifications of what they were seeing, the more frightening it was. Regardless of the levels of their cultivation bases, all of them felt profound terror of Bai Xiaochun rising up inside of them. Bai Xiaochun coughed dryly and then shrugged his shoulders at the cultivators of the Polarity River Court and Dao River Court. You see? He said, sounding very wronged. They forced my hand. Like I said, when I get angry, I frighten even myself. But they didn't listen, did they? They insisted on bullying me. Suddenly, he cocked his head to the side, as if he'd just remembered something. Looking at the core formation cultivators from the other two sects, he said, "Oh right, you two were about to say something, weren't you?" The cultivators of both sects were trembling, and the foundation establishment disciples edged backward again, trying to put some distance between themselves and the core formation elders. As for those elders, their hearts were starting to pound. Glancing over at the tragic scene playing out, they quickly offered explanations. "Oh no, I wasn't going to say much. Just that you really live up to your reputation, fellow Taoist Bai. You're like a dragon among men." "Yeah, exactly. Your sect is definitely going to be very popular in the middle reaches." Bai Xiaochun laughed heartily in response. Looking very pleased with himself, he was just about to boast a little bit more when suddenly, a cold snort echoed out thunderously from inside the grand hall. Everything trembled as a figure sped out of the hall, an old man with a full head of fiery red hair, and eyes that sparkled like lightning. Instantly, the maddened disciples shivered, and then began to vomit. After a moment passed, their pale faces once again filled with color. They were clearly weakened, and when they looked over at Bai Xiaochun, their gazes were filled with both confusion and terror. That was especially true of Chen Yunshan, who was glaring murderously at Bai Xiaochun. In his heart, he had already vowed to kill Bai Xiaochun in the future, to settle the score for the humiliation he had just experienced. After rescuing the maddened disciples, the red-haired old man turned his gaze upon Bai Xiaochun. Of course, considering that the man was vastly above Bai Xiaochun in both terms of cultivation base and status, it wasn't appropriate to meet his gaze. Therefore, Bai Xiaochun simply looked down innocently and kicked at a nearby pebble. The red-haired old man gave a cold harumph, then stalked grim-faced back into the grand hall. Bai Xiaochun immediately looked back up and glared in the old man's direction. Then he glanced around at the other disciples around him, and tried to decide whether or not to enter the hall himself. That was when Frigid Sect's voice echoed out. "Xiaochun, stop causing trouble outside. Come in." Sticking his chest out proudly, Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath and walked somberly toward the entrance to the hall. The disciples of the three sects looked at him with mixed emotions in their eyes. Furthermore, none of them were in any mood to harass the river-defying sect anymore. Upon entering the grand hall, Bai Xiaochun heard the voice of the red-haired old man he'd just seen. "The river-defying sect is not the Sky River Court. It doesn't make any sense at all for the river-defying sect to get the Sky River Court's shares for no reason." Bai Xiaochun scanned the hall, and saw Frigid Sect, Master Godwind, and Patriarch Crimson Soul sitting in the position of honor, grim expressions on their faces. Seated in 2 rows in front of them, on the left and right, were 8 other cultivators. Without a single exception, all of those cultivators had nascent soul cultivation bases, and profound ones at that. Terrifying fluctuations spread out from them in all directions. "That's right," one of them said. "Resources are limited, and we all have sects to sustain. Obviously, the strong get stronger and the weak get weaker. You can't blame anyone but yourselves for that." Although the nascent soul cultivators of the 3 sects noticed Bai Xiaochun enter the hall, none of them paid him much attention, with the exception of the red-haired old man, whose eyes glittered with brutal ferocity. Bai Xiaochun pretended not to notice, striding somberly over to stand next to Frigid Sect. Frigid Sect gritted his teeth. Voice rigid with anger, he said, "The river-defying sect took over the Sky River Court, and that includes the Sky River Court's shares." "Brother Frigid Sect," said another of the nascent soul cultivators, "these are simply the rules governing the Middle Reaches cultivation world. It's not like we're specifically targeting the river-defying sect." As Bai Xiaochun listened to the nascent soul cultivators' discussion, he gradually came to understand why the 3 other sects had come to visit. There was an arcane pocket realm in the Middle Reaches that opened once every 60-year cycle, within which were copious amounts of spirit plants. Some were the type that only appeared once every 10,000 years, others were virtually extinct in the outside world. Furthermore, there were a few that were critical ingredients to concocting diva pills, which could give nascent soul cultivators a much better chance to advance to the mortal tier diva realm. The value of such pills to virtually any sect couldn't be put into words. Every time the spirit plants in the arcane pocket realm were harvested, the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect would take roughly half of the crop, and divide the rest among the 4 great sects. The entrance to that arcane pocket realm was located in a sealed legacy zone, an area that had been constructed ages ago by the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect itself. By sealing the entrance to the pocket realm within a legacy zone, it not only kept the spirit plants safe, it also provided a chance for disciples of the 4 sects to earn magical techniques and divine abilities from the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect. That was also a way for the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect to scout for possible new disciples. The Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect had long since established rules governing how to split up the harvest from the pocket realm. Before the opening of the realm, the 4 sects would send disciples into the legacy zone to acquire legacy seals. Only 100 such seals were available, and the number acquired by the disciples would determine how many resources their sect got when the shares were divided. It was now only a few dozen years before the arcane pocket realm was to be opened again. Last time, the Sky River Court had taken second place in terms of shares, earning 30% of the resources, all of which still remained in the treasure storehouses, untouched. Those resources were extremely important to the nascent soul patriarchs of the river-defying sect, who could make use of them in their attempts to reach the Diva realm. But now, the 3 sects had come to redistribute the shares from the previous harvest, and wanted the river-defying sect to hand over the resources, and even make up for any that were missing. The red-haired old man from the Starry River Court looked at Frigid Sect and then spoke in a harsh tone. Those resources belong to the Sky River Court, not the river-defying sect. If you want resources like that, you're going to have to work for them yourself. Bai Xiaochun frowned as his train of thought was interrupted, and his attention was drawn to the nascent soul cultivators from the 3 sects. Based on what he understood, the Dao River Court was the strongest of the sects, and had taken first place last time. To them, this wasn't a very big issue, and as such, they weren't saying much in the discussion. The Polarity River Court had come in third, and also had little to say. From what Bai Xiaochun could tell, the Starry River Court had come in last, and had the greatest motivation to push the issue. They weren't willing to back down, and it was primarily them who were trying to intimidate the river-defying sect. In fact, it was entirely likely that they had made offers of compensation to the other 2 sects to make this meeting happen. Essentially, they wanted to take advantage of the river-defying sect's weakness to steal their resources. Frigid Sect and the other patriarchs were doing their best to suppress their fury. Just when the red-haired old man was about to say something more, a white-robed old man from the Dao River Court, who had been dozing the entire time, suddenly opened his eyes and said, "Enough. The matter is settled. We've already been in contact with the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, who have come up with a method to resolve the issue. Although the legacy zone is usually only opened once every 60-year cycle, this time, we are being allowed to open it outside of the normal schedule. We'll send our disciples in to take the trial by fire, and use the results to determine how the shares are redistributed. What do you think, fellow Taoist Frigid Sect?" Frigid Sect maintained his silence for a moment, then took a deep breath. He well knew that he wasn't in a position to disagree. If he did, it could have serious negative ramifications in the future. Furthermore, considering the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect had already given their stamp of approval, the river-defying sect had no qualifications to disagree. Diva realm, he thought. If only the river-defying sect had someone in the Diva realm, then things wouldn't play out like this. Finally, he gritted his teeth and nodded. Smiling, the white-robed old man rose to his feet. "Excellent. In that case, I won't disturb you any further. See you in a month at the Arcane Pocket Realm." With that, he walked out of the hall. The nascent soul Taoist masters from the Polarity River Court had icy smiles on their faces as they also left. Last was the red-haired old man from the Starry River Court. Just before walking out of the hall, he looked back at Frigid Sect and said, "Oh, one more thing. I forgot to mention the requirement to enter the Legacy Zone. The only people who qualify are core formation cultivators who reached the stage within one 60-year cycle." In response, the faces of Frigid Sect and the other patriarchs turned even more grim. When he saw the reactions of Frigid Sect, Master Godwind, and Patriarch Crimson Soul, the red-haired old man chuckled disdainfully, then flicked his sleeve and walked out. Rumbling could be heard outside of the Grand Hall as the cultivators of the 3 sects boarded their magical flight devices and then shot off into the distance, leaving behind nothing more than billowing winds and swirling dust. "Damn it," Crimson Soul said through gritted teeth. Master Godwind frowned. "I guess this is our fault for not understanding the rules of the Middle Reaches cultivation world." Frigid Sect smiled wryly and said, "With the plentiful resources here in the Middle Reaches, it's not as difficult for cultivators to reach core formation within a 60-year cycle. In the lower reaches, such an accomplishment is very, very difficult." At that point, he suddenly seemed to remember something, and looked over at Bai Xiaochun. Moments later, Master Godwind and Crimson Soul were also looking at him. Bai Xiaochun felt a bit unnerved to be stared at by these 3, and couldn't help but subconsciously take a few steps back. Patriarchs, Xiaochun, the reason we were just bullied and humiliated right now is because our sect is too weak." "That's right, Xiaochun. Now that I think about it, there's only one person in the entire river-defying sect who reached core formation within a 60-year cycle. One. If you recall, Li Qinghao was the only person in the sect recently who had a chance to reach core formation in 2 60-year cycles, not one. This fact was mentioned in multiple chapters, including chapters 72, 97, and 175. If the hope for the generation was for him to do that, then obviously he didn't reach core formation in 1 60-year cycle. Night Crypt, my boy, as the junior patriarch, surely you understand how important this matter is to the future development of the sect. Although the words spoken by the 3 patriarchs were all different, as were the expressions on their faces, the gleams in their eyes were exactly the same. Bai Xiaochun suddenly felt as if his throat were bone dry. Moments ago, he had been standing there listening quietly, feeling much the same anger as the patriarchs. But then the 3 old fogies suddenly turned to stare at him, and even worse, when they began to talk, their words caused his heart to tremble. Inwardly, he was crying out in grief, especially when he thought about the fact that he really was the only core formation cultivator in the sect who had reached that stage within a 60-year cycle. When it came to legacy zones, sects would usually send 7 or 8 people, but in this case, he would be going in alone. The mere idea struck Bai Xiaochun with fear, and it was even worse considering that he had just aggressively heaped bad fortune onto the disciples from the Starry River Court, and had also brazenly threatened the Polarity River Court and the Dao River Court. At this point, his expression suddenly turned somber. A bitter look appeared in his eyes as he continued, "Listen, patriarchs, the truth is that I actually lied about my age before. Yeah, now that I'm the junior patriarch, I can't continue to hide the truth. Back when I was found on that mountain, I wasn't a teenager, I was actually 40. I just looked young, and decided to perpetuate the lie. I was wrong, I know. I should have told you the truth, and not caused such confusion for the sect during important times." Bai Xiaochun's voice was filled with regret, and he truly sounded as if he were divulging a long-harbored secret. As he spoke, his hands slowly clenched into fists. "Patriarchs, I truly feel terrible. Every time I think about my true age, and how I've hidden it for so long, I feel worse and worse. Alright, well I guess it's time to go into secluded meditation now." Even as he spoke, he turned and hurried toward the door. Crimson Soul was frowning, and Master Godwind looked quite anxious. Just as they were about to speak, Frigid Sect smiled wryly and said, "Xiaochun, you're going, whether you want to or not." However, Bai Xiaochun didn't stop heading toward the door. "Nobody wants our sect to seem weak, right?" Frigid Sect continued. "If we can't produce a single core formation cultivator who succeeded within 1 60-year cycle, it will only mean further humiliation at the hands of the 3 other sects. I'm afraid if that happens, we won't have a very strong foundation in the middle reaches." When Bai Xiaochun heard that, he slowed down a bit, his heart twisting with indecision. Frigid Sect seemed to be getting a bit worked up as he went on, "But that's okay. You're the most important of all, Xiaochun. The sect is your home, and we're your family. We won't force you to do anything you don't want to do. Even if we get bullied and humiliated, we'll protect you, and all the other disciples too." Bai Xiaochun was at the door, looking out at the world outside, indecision gripping his heart and refusing to let go. This time, Frigid Sect said, "The river-defying sect will just have to concede defeat. Master Godwind, Crimson Soul, there's no need to send me secret messages with divine sense. I've already made my decision." Frigid Sect suddenly seemed older, his voice laced with bleakness and exhaustion. Bai Xiaochun stood there looking up sadly into the sky. "What?" Frigid Sect said loudly. "What's that you say via projected message, Master Godwind?" "No. Although we know going in that we will lose, and only want to do it to keep from losing face, we can't send Bai Xiaochun in alone." "Yes, I know. Bai Xiaochun once said in his heart that he lives for the sect. Yes, I know we treat him well. I know all that. But you might as well give up trying to persuade me. Crimson Soul, stop projecting messages. My mind has been made up. It doesn't matter that Xiaochun has precious treasures to defend himself with, as well as a Heaven Dao gold core. It doesn't matter that he has cultivated an incredibly powerful fleshly body, and that it would be virtually impossible for anyone under nascent soul to kill him. Nor does it matter that, by the dharmic decree of the Starry Sky Dao Polarity Sect, killing is forbidden in the Legacy Seal competition. Bai Xiaochun is our junior patriarch. Even if the place offers no dangers whatsoever, we definitely can't take any risks at all." Bai Xiaochun gritted his teeth and turned to face the 3 patriarchs, looking almost like he was about to cry. "Fine, I'll go, alright? Enough with the persuading." The instant the words left Bai Xiaochun's mouth, Frigid Sect rose to his feet, walked over to him, and clasped him enthusiastically on the shoulder. "Good kid. Alright, the matter's set. This jade slip will tell you everything you need to know about the Legacy Zone. Study it carefully, make whatever preparations you need to. In a month, the three of us will personally escort you to the Legacy Zone. With that, he turned and sped away. Master Godwind and Crimson Soul gave approving glances to Bai Xiaochun, but fearing that he might suddenly change his mind, they quickly teleported away. Bai Xiaochun looked around with wide eyes at the empty hall. He reached his hands out as if he wanted to grab onto something, but the only thing he had to grab onto was his hair. Those crafty foxes, he wailed. Schemers, all of them. There's no way they didn't know about the rules. Obviously, they knew from the beginning, and were just trying to con me. Scowling, Bai Xiaochun suddenly felt as if he was very, very naive. After walking dejectedly out of the hall, he looked up into the sky, and it somehow seemed very, very dark. He moped all the way back to his immortals cave, where he sat down cross-legged in grief. Then he thought about how he would have to single-handedly go up against people from all three of the other sects, and he suddenly felt quite lonely. Wait, it won't be just me. I can take Bruiser with me. He reached core formation in less than a 60-year cycle. The two of us against all those people. How will we handle it? They're definitely going to bully us. What do I do? Hanging his head dispiritedly, he took out the jade slip and started to go over the information about the Legacy Zone. According to the detailed description in the jade slip, there were a total of 100 legacy seals inside. Last time, the Sky River Court sent 13 qualified disciples into the Legacy Zone, who managed to acquire 30 seals. Unfortunately, none of them managed to acquire enlightenment of any of the legacy techniques. In the end, the Sky River Court got 30% of the resources, whereas the Starry River Court, who came in last place, only got 10%. The rules for how to distribute the resources were set down by the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, and couldn't be changed. Bai Xiaochun sighed again. For the following several days, he continued to mull over the matter until he made his final decision. Fudge, I already said I'd go, right? Fine, I'll go. After he thought about how many other people he would be competing against, he decided to go buy a huge amount of paper talismans. He didn't purchase them with merit points, but rather, got them on credit. Next, he went to the treasure pavilion, where he did the same thing to acquire a large collection of magical items. Finally, he purchased some armor and more leather clothing. Realizing that the only thing he lacked was a big black wok, he searched the sect up and down until he found an extraordinarily sturdy iron wok that was more than suitable. Next, he gritted his teeth and requested some multicolored fuel from the patriarchs, which he used to perform 5-fold spirit enhancements on all of his items, including the big black wok. Despite how many items he had purchased, he still didn't feel safe. Next, he went to the Profound Stream Division to request some spell formations, then to the Bloodstream Division to request Spirit Blood, and finally to the Pillstream Division to request Spirit Medicines. By the time he was finished with all these activities, half a month had passed. For the next half month, he focused on cultivation, and ended up inching closer toward a breakthrough. As for his work with his undying tendons, the big toe on his left foot was finished. Whenever he called upon it, shocking fleshly body power would surge through him, originating from the toe. Unfortunately, using that power would also cause his shoe to explode. Because of that, Bai Xiaochun also prepared a large number of shoes for his left foot. Eventually, the long-awaited day came. At dawn, Bai Xiaochun walked out of his immortal's cave, wearing numerous layers of leather clothing, and a black wok strapped to his back. He had paper talismans plastered all over him, and overall, looked very sad. Then he headed toward the summit of Mount River Defiance, followed by the curious Bruiser, who was wearing a suit of armor and plenty of paper talismans, and yet radiated an air of complete ferocity. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.